and students, inshallah, on 077 488 55055 that you are listening. And I'm sure Mr. Adam here, so Brother Farhan, inshallah, will get very happy when they get to know students, say 20 years ago, maybe, oh, Assalamu alaikum, sir, remember me? And I'm sure he will say yes to that.
Absolutely.
Okay, anyway, today's program is all about leadership, and leadership is the core essence of any institute or school or college or university or establishment, or even company, or you could say even to governments and to different areas and countries. Leadership is the key element for success, and without that good leadership and a leadership of quality, you won't get the attainment, or you won't get the success of countries, of individuals, of establishments and schools and colleges and so forth. So it's quite a crucial area, and that's where we're going to talk about leadership today. And we've got the expert of leadership, the expert being the one who has actually gone through the process of the different stages of leadership and to have responsibility. They're the ones who become the experts. Because I can have a book about leadership and I can read it and talk about it and go through it. It is not the same as that individual is actually going through the process themselves, who are going through leadership. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And leadership is such an essential item in individuals and in schools and colleges and groups. Why? Because it is leadership about leading. It's about influence. It's about making a change, making an impact, and guiding. So, Brother Farhan, mashallah, your leadership role. Tell the audience out there, what is your leadership role?
So, being principal of Crown Hills Community College, we have 1,500 students. Obviously attached to that, parents and carers. So you have, in the region of 3,000 of those, and then you have 200 staff. So you're looking at a community of close to, 2,000 people that you have a responsibility for. And I think that's the key word that you talked about. It's responsibility. I think a lot of people associate leadership with power and with authority. But I think from an Islamic point of view, we look at it from a responsibility point of view. We are responsible for other people. And there are many ahadith and Quran ayahs that talk about the responsibility. And that's the difference between non-religious leadership and religious leadership. It's about responsibility rather than power.
Subhanallah. And just reflecting on leadership, or the leaders of all leaders, our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you'll find all the leadership qualities that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if we look into his life, we'll be actually amazed to see how Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam utilized these different methods or methodologies of leadership in different circumstances, in different ways to reach that positive outcome at the end. And in comparison, we've got the leadership roles within education and how that can mirror in together. And one thing I just want to mention here, so for example, you've got a class full of students, for example, and the students, the end but in a classroom will be towards the teacher. So any situation, any issue, any positive, any negative, any issue, they will turn towards the teacher. Now the teacher, if there's any issues, we'll turn towards maybe, their line manager or their department, whatever that they're with. And then from there, they'll turn towards senior leaders. And from there, they'll turn to the end, but goes to the principal. Am I right?
Yes.
So what kind of qualities do you need to be such a leader? So, for example, you're responsible for, you're saying, so many thousand students, so many thousand parents and carers and staff and support staff. What qualities do you need to be successful in that role?
One of the biggest qualities you need is patience. And you need to be able to be calm in every situation, because you don't know when you walk into a building. It's not as if you're walking into a factory where you have machines that are working. When you're dealing with people and emotions, and you're dealing with individuals, children of different ages, teenagers who are changing their life, going through changes in their life, and you're dealing with 200 staff, then you need to be able to be patient to deal with the difficulties that is thrown at you on a day-to-day basis. One of the biggest things you need to be able to listen, and you need to be able to. There's something called deep listening, where you're able to actually take part in a conversation with somebody, where you do less of the talking, but you hear what the problems are, and you're a problem solver to try and help them solve their problem. And I think these are some of the biggest qualities that are needed to be able to be a leader, regardless of, I think, whatever position you hold. It's about, like I said, coming back to that responsibility and knowing that I'm responsible for this individual. They've come to me with a problem. I then have the responsibility to sort this problem out. How am I going to do it? What do I need to do? Who do I need to contact? How can I put things in place for this individual? Whether it's a child that comes to your door, whether it's a parent that comes for help, or whether it's a member of staff that needs that level of support.
Obviously, with all the, you could end up with 1,000 things happening at the same time, but you got to keep cool and calm and focused all the time. How would you maintain that? Because that's a very big challenge if you think about it. Even though you've got one child here, one parent here, another student here, and then you get a member of staff coming in. How do you keep that calm? We're not going to panic. Yes, we're going to take this forward.
How you do it, everyone has their own ways of doing it, but you have to develop that approach and that style over time. But you have to understand that sometimes there's a fear as a leader when you go into a situation that you have to have all the answers. And part of being a leader is to know that actually I don't have all the answers, but I have a team with me, and together we will find the answer. One thing within our deen and our sharia is very clear, that mashwara is very important and consultation is very important. So that's my strategy. That's something that I use consistently, and I'll use it with my team because I believe I have the answers. But the answer is within 10 people's minds put together, put the problem forward, and together we'll find the solution to the problem. The main responsibility of the leader is that they will find the solution and they will make sure that the solution is found. That's what I suppose a leader's responsibility is, not to actually have the answer, but to be responsible to find the answer.
So to be cool and calm, first of all, then to listen well. I noticed how you said listening. Does that also encompass then over empathy and actually...
Emotional intelligence. You need to have an awareness and you need to know what triggers you as well. Sometimes you can be in a very emotional situation because of the situation you're dealing with. But it's very important that you try and remove yourself from it, or try not to have the conversation when you are in that situation. Or you need to find a method that you can control yourself. Because if you, as the person responsible, come across as though you're out of control, then unfortunately it has a negative effect on the people around you. As the leader, you have to be the one that shows a level of calmness and confidence to be able to give to the other person because they've come to you with the problem, even though you probably don't know how you're going to solve it at that moment in time, but you've got to give that reassurance to the people.
And I suppose you've got to look in your toolbox of solutions, and that's going to build up as you go along over the years with experience. And as you say, that toolbox is not just limited to yourself, but it's with your senior leaders and to work together for the solution. So just for the benefit of the listeners out there, so the process, I'm thinking about the process here. First of all, being cool and calm. Number two, listening to that high quality, with that deep listening, with that emotional intelligence and empathy in keeping that in forward. And then with that, at the same time, having this toolbox of a solution of delegating. And many times you have to prioritize, right?
You do. And talking about what we just did then, that's to dealing with individuals, okay? Then there's trying to take an institution forward. Then you're trying to drive change. One is, these are just qualities that you need to be able to deal with individuals, to solve problems, and to keep the thing ticking over. I had a conversation with a colleague the other day, and we were talking about the difference between leadership and management. And it's something that I've tried to understand, especially as I was going through, being a head of department, etc., trying to understand, well, if I'm a manager, what's the difference? If I'm a leader, so what? And an example you're probably aware of that I've spoken to you about previously.
This is a common question in a leadership job.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're applying for a job for leadership, this is the question you're going to get.
So, the question that I remember being asked going for an assistant head's position was, what's the difference between leadership and management? And the example that I pulled on was a referee in a football match. A referee in a football match makes sure that the game is performed well, and that if there's any fouls or any free kicks, they are given and the flow of the game keeps moving, okay? And that there's fairness and it's dealt with properly. But nobody follows the referee. Nobody follows what the referee is not trying to take the game anyway. He's not trying to win the game. He's just managing the situation. So that is management. Management is about making sure systems take place, but leadership is different. Leadership is you're trying to take people to a destination. So as a leader, you need to know, where do you want to take the people, the organization, or those that you are responsible for? Where's that destination? What's that followers? People therefore need to be able to trust you and follow you. You need to have qualities that they want to follow to be able to take you to a destination.
I suppose the challenge is how to get everybody onto your vision.
You have to share that vision, and you have to,
And what if you get individuals who are up with your vision? So, for example, all the staff are for it, but you might find the parents are completely disagreeing with it. Then what?
And then you have to be brave enough to say to the parents, this is what we stand for. This is what we believe in. This is how we are going to operate. There are plenty of other schools in the city. If you don't believe the way that we're doing it, that's fine, and you're entitled to that opinion. Let's hear what you've got to say if we can improve. But if we agree to disagree, then people have to make the decision for themselves and send their children, or if it's a member of staff that needs to work somewhere, we'll decide to work somewhere else. That's just the nature of the beast.
And how do you maintain that the quality of leadership is at its best level? I know one of the things that all heads are that crucial phone call, late morning from Ofsted, that we are going to come into your school tomorrow. Is that the most, how would you say, accountable point to be in, and then to prepare for all your staff for the next day when they're going to come in? By the way, listeners, Brother Farhan here, I will share that he's also an Ofsted inspector. So obviously he can give us the experience on both sides here. What happens then?
It depends how you run your school. There are people that will run their school from one Ofsted inspection to another Ofsted inspection because they believe that that's where the accountability starts. From our point of view, and looking at it from a religious point of view, the accountability starts the moment you take on the job. Okay? In the same way that if you look back at the Khulafa Rashidin and we hear stories about Hazrat Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, how at night he would walk the streets, and then he came across a lady that was in the latter stages of childbirth, and how he went and he carried the sack on his shoulder, and how he went and got his slave Aslam to help him to put the fire together. That was his understanding of what leadership is, because of the accountability that he will face on the Day of Judgment. We hear from the ulama and from the scholars that on the Day of Judgment a person will stand on the bridge of Sirat with their hands behind them, and they will be questioned about the leadership role that they had. So Ofsted has its own accountability framework within, this country, within the education system. But we have an internal mechanism of accountability which is even beyond that. Whether there's Ofsted come into the building or not, it makes no difference. And the approach that I take with staff is we have to do what's right by these children now, regardless. If Ofsted come in, fine. If we're doing right by the children now, it doesn't matter whether Ofsted come in today, tomorrow, next year, or whatever. Yeah. And that's the approach we take. If you feel the responsibility and the accountability on your shoulder and responsibility from day one when you take on the role, you don't need to worry about external accountability. There is accountability that we need to worry about, which will be when we're questioned about the lives that we were responsible for underneath us as leaders. That is the thing to worry about.
And indeed, you find in the Sahaba and with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the more responsibility and the more leadership role they take, the more humbleness comes in. And I believe that's quite a key element here, because one of the most dangerous things, might be agreeing or disagreeing with this, Brother Farhan, but is as you go up the ladder, as it were, and you're more in charge and more responsible for individuals, then there could be the element of slight pride that could come in, right? And then, of course, that could affect a person's character. What's your intake on that?
Absolutely. I think, and this is where our understanding of leadership is very different from a non-religious model, okay? In a non-religious model, it doesn't matter what your intention is. You become a supreme individual that is responsible and has power over people. You make decisions based on what you want. It doesn't matter what your intention is, right? But from a religious point of view, the intention with which you have taken on the crown of leadership is the first port of call. Everything stems from there. Because if you have gone in and stood up for leadership because you want the name and you want the fame, then already the intention is wrong. Therefore, there's going to be problems in that situation for you anyway, because the intention has been wrong.
That's right.
So it all starts from that. Why do you want to take on leadership? What will you do when you have taken on that leadership? That's the next question. So if your intention is wrong, then your actions are going to be wrong. And then you are going to find yourself in difficulty. And I'm not sitting here saying that my intentions are pure. I'm the pure. I'm not coming from. I'm trying to give it from a conceptual, theoretical point of view. So you always have to be checking your intention with which you go in. Based on that intention, your leadership will be as a result of that. So if you feel that you are solely in charge and you are the person that has ultimate power and authority and nobody can say anything because you're in charge, then ultimately you're not going to have humility. You're not going to have hamdardi. You're not going to have these qualities that are required of a leader because you feel you are the supreme individual. But if you are going in for leadership, and this is where I think the Sahaba, and you look at the Tabi'een and the type of leadership that they had in the Khulafa Rashidin, it was they went into this, they didn't want it. That's the first thing. They didn't want the leadership. They were given the leadership by somebody else. So that's your first quality. The second thing is when they took it on, they felt the responsibility, but it was a service leadership. I am here to serve the people in charge, or that I am in charge of. They are not here to serve me. I am here to serve them. And if you look in now, in the last 50 years, modern contemporary leaders have started to talk about this quality of servant leadership. But this was there from the time of Sahaba. It was a time from Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. What happened in the battle of Khandaq, if you look in the trench, when the Sahaba lifted their shirt to see one stone tied to their belly, when they saw Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he had two stones. So he led by example. Leadership is you have to go through the difficult. And this is where the religious leadership is different to the non-religious leadership. The leadership in a religious point of view is that we have to give up more than the people that we are leading. Whereas the non-religious model is everyone has to serve me because I'm the leader.
So in essence, we could actually say a true leadership is the true role model. You are the ultimate role model for that position.
You're the ultimate servant to the people.
MashaAllah.
That's the way we need to look at it, because we have to serve them. It's a role. We are in the role and we have responsibility and we have the ability to make changes, but not make changes for the betterment of ourselves, but for the betterment of other individuals. So if you want to become a leader, my biggest advice is to think about why do you want to go into that position. Yeah, what is your rationale? What's the thing that really underpins this drive and desire within you to want to become a leader? If it is to serve other people, then you know that you're in the right ballpark of the reason why you're going into it.
Okay, mashallah. Time's whizzing on. Absolutely brilliant here. By the way, listeners out there, 077 488 55055, do text in your views on this and what your thoughts are as we are discussing this very important point here about leadership. For the Farhan, one thing I just wanted to, thought across my mind just now, is that obviously you're going through all this situation of individual, of staff, of students, of parents, and the whole school driving it forward. So obviously there's a lot on a person's head as a leader. How does that affect one's own, well-being and one's own level of concern? Because you could go home with a lot of worries on your head, and you've got all these worries of every student, every member of staff, and the whole community in front of you. And you might be lifting your hands and crying for everybody, but obviously that build-up, how would you cope on that, and what's the stake on that?
That's probably one of the biggest things, to have that burden of responsibility on your shoulders, knowing that every decision you make, every problem that comes to your door, it's very difficult. And I think in my early years, this is now my 9th year, I think, of being a head in my second school. In my early years, when I first took on my first headship, this is something that really bothered me and it really affected me. And your health suffers as a result of that, because you have all of these problems, and sometimes there can be very personal attacks on you as an individual, especially if you're trying to go into an institution to bring about change. Yeah. People are creatures of habit and they don't want to change, and you're trying to raise standards or whatever it is that you're trying to introduce. people have no way of fighting through that apart from taking it out on the individual that's bringing about the change. So sometimes you can make it very personal to yourself. And that's, I think, again, when you feel the pressure and the responsibility. But the other thing is, as you get older, you start to realize that you have a framework with which you make decisions and you carry the weight of the burden. And the first thing is, have we done everything right by this individual? Then if I can sleep at night knowing that, okay, maybe I've had to make Brother Khalid, I've had to make the decision that his job is made redundant. Okay? For example, let's take a scenario. That's a burden to know that you're not going to be able to work. Okay? You're going to lose your income. Your family is going to suffer as a result of that. But the way that I got to that decision, how did I do that? And how did I make that? If it was, Khalid, he really annoys me. I need to get rid of him. Then there's a burden there that I need to hold. But if I know, right, actually I did this for the right reasons, this is all the evidence base, and I've been open and transparent about it, then I know that I can sleep at night because I've got no ulterior motive. I think the sleepless nights come when you know that you have done wrong by an individual. But if you know that you are doing everything within your power that was correct, and you put those systems in place, and then you turn to the Almighty to ask Him for His help, then you have to learn that there are decisions that you are not in control of. The Almighty then takes over. And you have to accept that is taqdeer. I have to then accept whatever comes my way because this is what it is.
And I suppose it's always for the bigger picture. You got to have that long-term vision and the big vision in front of you.
You can't get bogged down in small issues that if you let it, they can really affect you and have an effect on your mental health and physical health.
Time's whizzing on. I just wanted to question here that obviously you being an offset inspector also, how going into school would you look at leadership and how would you make sure that it's of outstanding standards, to be honest, leadership in a whole nutshell?
Leadership, in that sense, I suppose it's all about the standards and the expectations that the leaders have in the school. Okay? So I've worked in schools, not just in Leicester, but outside of Leicester, where because of the type of children that the school had, teachers and people within the school felt, well, they're only from this background. Their parents, for example, might not speak English. So you know what? All we need to do is just make sure we get them through school, get them some half-decent grades, and maybe they'll be all right. That level of expectation doesn't give those kids the best opportunities in life. Yeah? It's just, we'll get through it. Or there's some schools where they don't even know what's going on in certain parts of the school. And again, that's because leaders don't know. And leaders haven't taken the opportunity to try and find out what's going on. You then judge the school, well, that's not acceptable, because did you know that this is happening? Did you know that there's this type of bullying? Did you know that there's this happening in your school? No, I didn't. Again, that shows poor leadership. If there's no expectations for these students, if they don't want to help these students to go beyond their expectations, again, that's poor leadership because those students aren't achieving the best that they can. So there's expectations, and what are the expectations of leadership? And we assess that by speaking to staff, speaking to students, and finding out what they believe they can achieve in that school. Because ultimately, if leaders have high expectations, then those students should achieve better than what they are currently.
Okay, and obviously you've got your framework of a benchmark of standards that you will look at.
Which gives us an indication. It's an indication. It is not the indication. It is something that obviously the government with Ofsted have come up with. Whether that's exactly the right thing or not, that's up for debate, and I'm not here to say whether it is or not. This is a framework we are told, here it is, and go in schools and check whether that's happening or not.
So the big question is it worthwhile being a leader?
It's worthwhile being a leader once you see the smile and the face of a child, when you see a member of staff that's grown and overcome a problem. But there's a lot of dark nights of the soul. And there are a lot of times where you are questioning what you're doing, whether you're doing the right thing, whether you are making the right decisions, whether what you are doing is having the right impact, because you've made a decision about something and is it having the right impact on the people that you made the decision for? And there are some times where you have to turn around and say, hands up, you know what, I'm sorry, I made the wrong decision here. We need to learn from it, and it won't happen again. But is it worth it? On the whole, if you feel that you can make the difference to the lives of other people, one thing I talk about is touching the hearts of individuals. And the more hearts you can touch, the more benefit you can give them, the more benefit you can give, then it's worth it. But sometimes you don't always see it.
I know there's also these kind of rumors also come around that if you're a senior leader, or if you're a head, or even an offset inspector, that you can't have friends. Is that true?
It's a very lonely place in terms of your job. Yeah. And if you live and breathe your job, you are working 12, 14 hours a day. That's standard. Sometimes you don't have the time to be able to spend with friends, with people. You can't have friends within your own institution because you are going to have to make some difficult decisions about individuals that you manage. So therefore, yeah, that's probably a no-no. But you can have friends outside of the school. That's not a problem. It's getting the time to be able to have those.
And I believe, I think one of the biggest things, statistically, if we look, especially with the BME community, and this is our national picture. If you look at, for example, senior leaders and the amount of heads from a BME background, it is very, very, very significantly low. Why do you think that is?
Why? I'm not sure. I mean, there's a plethora of different reasons. Sometimes as a community, we suffer from an inferiority complex and we don't have a belief that we can take on those positions. And I think sometimes we are the biggest barrier to ourselves and we don't allow ourselves to, put ourselves forward. Part of it is that we have to learn to fail and we have to we have to accept failure and to try and keep moving forward. Those are key qualities, I believe. But, touching on what you just talked about, I remember 10 years ago, we started a program within the city to try and address that problem because we had about 160 leaders, senior leaders within the city from the 16, 17 different secondary schools that we have. I think we only had about 3 that were from a black or ethnic minority. Mm-hmm. So the percentage of that was probably, 1%, if that at all, okay? Slowly, we've increased that number. But we've done it through a program which Khalid yourself has been involved in to try and redress that balance, to try and give people the confidence and the skills and the qualities that they need to be able to take on these positions. Now I would say we're probably in the region of at least 5 or 6%, if not close to the 10% mark, because of the program that we've done.
For the benefit of the listeners, I also went through this. It's actually called Aspire program, Aspire to Leadership. And it was absolutely amazing out of my own experience. It was a residential, 2 days, if I'm not mistaken. And it was a full-on different workshops and different sessions. And first of all, I think the key point from it is it inspires an individual to become a leader. It brings out the leadership qualities from individuals. And then from there, it inspires for the next step. And we found that that cohort we went through also, many of them have moved on into leadership roles of that nature, not even nationally, internationally also. So quickly, in a snapshot, what was that program all about? What did it entail?
The program was to try and help. What we did was we recruited a number of senior leaders from up and down the country that were from a BME background. And we used them as role models to coach and to manage these aspirant leaders within the BAME community in Leicester. We had 110, I think, or 120 go through the program, and roughly 90 out of those 120 secured their next step in promotion through leadership. Not all of them have made senior leadership yet, but there's a significant number over the last now 5-6 years that have managed to break into senior leadership. The plan was we had actors that came in to have difficult conversations.
I definitely remember that one. I just, for the benefit of the audience, I remember there's actors there, and there was you had to basically go through having a difficult conversation with a member of staff who was actually an actor, and they were role-playing them having issues. And I tell you, they were brilliant actors. You had to really, they were crying, they were shouting, they were screaming, all sorts you get in front of you. And you had to literally talk through that and be, as you say, cool and calm and come up with a solution.
And you had somebody then sat on the side assessing you and then giving you feedback so that you actually got live coaching as part of that program. We then help them with interview technique, because interview is a learnt skill that people need to know how to interview, how to write an application, how do you meet the personal specification within that. So we taught them all the processes that gave them the tools to be able to, step into leadership.
And the difference of this workshop, it wasn't just a CPD you go for and that's it. It was actually a residential workshop, and then you had a action plan, you had a mentor who would follow it through for the next 6 months or so, and they would be senior leaders also. So it's a very effective model for inspiring and getting you moving on to the next step. To personally, I remember 30 years, I think I was in my 30s. Until then, I was just a normal teacher, and I was thinking to myself, yes, I'm not going to go into leadership. I'm happy where I am. But then after going through this program, it actually made me think, no, hang on, I can do this. And it's so important to do, and there's a gap here, and that's what inspired. And then a lot of people took it on, and they did very well. I think what would be very good was an alumni for those individuals. Nice to get together and where they ended up, and to share that. I think that's something you can do.
The
Farhan.
next step. It's on top of the day job. That's the problem. All of this is on top of your day job.
Right. The main point here is we want to inspire people out there, the listeners especially, to go in. So those who are existing as teachers, maybe move on to the next step. What would you say? First of all, what kind of roles are there in schools and colleges and universities where you have leadership roles?
So you can go from being, lower down in the scale, maybe a head of house, right at the bottom of those areas, or you can take a responsibility, which is called a TLR, teaching and learning responsibility. Maybe
so head of house is something a head of year, for example.
No, slightly lower than that.
Okay.
You may have so it's like a temporary TLR, and you may also then be in charge of student council, or you may have a little bit of responsibility that you're given.
Yeah.
So one is to take on some of that. That's the first step on the rung. You then might, depending on the structure of schools, sometimes you have third in faculty or second in faculty, or a head of year. Those are then the next kind of middle leadership roles that you can take on. And then from there you can move into assistant headship, deputy headship, and then eventually headship if you want. Sometimes it's good to have both pastoral leadership, so like a head of year, as well as subject leadership, because those two things give you both sides of the school. If you think of a school, it has the academic side and it has the support mechanism side. And having experience in those two areas sets you up very well to go into senior leadership at some point.
And out of the box would be the leadership in governance.
Yes, and getting the governance gives you another string to your bow in terms of understanding the mechanics and accountability towards the head, as opposed to accountability the other way around. And that, it gives you another string to your bow as well.
So those are all the positions you can have in schools and establishments in education. So those were the routes. Sorry, I'm just going to... Excuse me. Alhamdulillah. Okay. So how would we actually go about doing? What would be the steps of moving on? So first of all, I would, you'd assess what position you're at. What would you do next? Like, for example, if I, want to tomorrow, okay, I want to be the head. What should I do?
The first thing is what people, what I found in the younger generation of teachers coming through is that they believe that the school will sort out their professional development. And that's the biggest mistake you can make. You have to take responsibility for your own professional development. And you have to start, if you think, for example, like you just said, Khalid, I want to become a head. So you need to think, right, where am I in the chain of this process in terms of leadership? If I'm a teacher and I want to get to headship, then I've got about 7 or 6 positions between where I am now and being ultimately in charge. So my first step is, what is that first TLR position that I can take on, that teaching and learning responsibility within the school? It may be a small area. What is it in my school? How many positions are there? And what can I do? If there isn't any vacancies within that, what can I identify in my school as an area that needs to be developed, and go to my head and say, you know what, I've noticed that there's an underachievement of boys within this specific area. Do you mind giving me that responsibility, and I'll take it on? Don't pay me, it's fine. By you taking on that responsibility and showing the initiative, you will learn from that process. And you're almost doing the next position that you want to without being paid for it, so that you're ready to do it. So that's the first thing that I would suggest to people, is take on more responsibility, even if you don't get paid for it, because that will help you secure your next position.
So it's very much getting that experience and building that portfolio of experience.
Yeah.
Okay. And then beyond the head, where would you go after the head?
I think because of the multi-academy trust model that we've got now developing in the country, you have executive heads now, you have CEOs, which are, very much like the business world. So you move from headship into those roles where you're now responsible for more than one school, and you may be responsible for, a group of schools as a CEO. So those are the kind of roles, I believe, that are available post-headship.
There must be funny moments, though, in leadership.
Absolutely.
You want to share some funny moments that you might have experienced? I know it's putting you on the spot.
It's very difficult to share some funny moments without putting other people on the spot who might be sitting in the audience. So I think it's better we move on from that one.
Because obviously people act in different ways. You might get differences in, opinions, and you might get differences in how people put themselves forward. And I suppose as you get into a more responsible position, people's attitudes might change. And obviously, you've just got to bear with that. Many times, I know you get this that people refer to. You have to be like a cardboard box, you find it funny, but you got to keep a straight face. I'm sure that's coming across.
Absolutely. Sometimes you can't help it.
You're biting your tongue, and
you're biting your tongue all the time. Yeah, indeed.
And obviously, you must enjoy it.
You enjoy it when you see the differences that you're trying to bring about come and happen at that's the best part, but that takes time. That's the problem. You don't see the immediate effect of some of the decisions that you've made, and that's where you need the patience, and you need to be able to have belief in, right, I'm taking this direction, I've taken the school in this direction, I've taken staff in this direction, let's give it time, and then we'll assess where we are, rather than trying to see immediate changes straight away, because you won't.
Quite a few years ago, I went to Canada. We went for raising achievements in city schools, and a whole group of us went to Canada. And there we saw that heads and senior leaders would only be in a position for 2 years maximum. They wouldn't keep them longer than that. What's your thoughts on that?
I don't think, unless your school only has maybe 100 students, and if that's the size of your school, then maybe you can bring about change quicker. But when you're running secondary schools and institutions that are quite large and have a culture that you're trying to change and establish, it's a minimum of 5 years that you need to be able to change a culture of an institution. Things don't happen overnight.
And you get some heads who are literally for 20 years, 30 years in headship. What's your thoughts about that? Is that too long?
It depends on the individual. If you're constantly trying to refine and improve yourself, and you're trying to be better than you were yesterday, and you continue to have that drive in the same institution for that period of time, no problem. But the risk is you become lazy and you become comfortable, and therefore you're not in a position to try and improve the institution. You become, well, I know this, what's the worst thing that can happen? It just becomes a daily, monotonous routine. Then it's dangerous for the institution because you're not moving forward.
And the big question is, how many hours do you have to give? Because obviously, how I can see, you have to be from the beginning to the end. You're the first. You're supposed to be the first one there and the last one out. How many hours are you expected to be there?
Expected is entirely up to you. There's this unwritten rule in education, it seems, that the longer you can stay in the car park, it shows you're more committed to the job. But I've tried to debunk that myth because I don't believe it's the proper way to do it. I believe that as long as your work gets done and the work that you need to do gets done, then you can go home whenever you feel. If you manage to complete that work by 4 o'clock and you don't need to work weekends, you don't work weekends. But each individual is different. But also you have to draw a line somewhere. You cannot, yes, you want perfection. Yes, you have high standards for yourself. But you also have to say, you know what, I've achieved enough today. I can't do anymore. I'm going to park that and pick that up again tomorrow. So you have to be very disciplined within yourself. At the beginning, and this, again, I've learned over the years, at the beginning, I was working 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I was sending emails out. I remember getting very ill in my first 6 months of leadership as a senior leader. I ended up getting pneumonia. But that was because I wasn't taking care of myself, and I just wanted to work all hours God sends because I thought I need to do this for the benefit of the children. You see, the difference in education and in business is that that there's a child at the end of it. In business, it may be your profit suffers or, whatever. But when you're dealing in education, if you delay a decision, it has an impact on a child. And that sense of responsibility, sometimes you can work yourself into the ground. But you also need to accept that, families have their responsibility. There's only so much you can do as a school and an institution. And you have to then call it a day to say, you know what, I've done enough. I need to now move on or do the next thing that I need to, rather than let it consume you.
SubhanAllah. And I suppose right at the top of the agenda will be a happy school is a productive school. So obviously you're trying your utmost best to make everybody happy, but it can be quite challenging.
The problem is making everybody happy. Sometimes if you remove accountability, everyone's happy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you've got to it's a difficult balance to have, because people are accountable for the lives of students, so they need to feel a bit of the pressure, but not oppressive. It shouldn't be oppression. There's a difference between being oppressive to somebody and being overly, I'm going to back off and have no accountability. It's striking a balance between accountability and happiness. But within the happiness, our job is to try and create the environment for staff to be able to flourish. And that's our job, to make the job easy for them.
MashaAllah, absolutely brilliant here. A very deep discussion. I hope all the listeners have benefited. Time is running out now. We just got about 2 minutes. So I'm just going to give Brother Farhan one last minute, last few words. What would you like to tell the audience out there?
What I would like to say is that I think we need more leaders. Our community needs more leaders, regardless whether it's in education, whether it's youth leadership, whether it's in politics or whatever it is in this country. If you are inspired by an individual, we've got elections happening currently over the next few weeks or so. It's important that as youngsters we engage ourselves in that, and we look at people, and if there are people out there that we think, I can make a difference like that individual, then my advice is go ahead and take control of it and do something about it. Whether that's at whatever level you are at, I think that's important.
MashaAllah, Jazakallah khair for very inspiring words there. And we just want to say at the end also, remember the leader of leaders, our beloved Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, do analyze his leadership's qualities and methodology, and then try to implement that into our lives, and you'll find, subhanallah, in all situations, everybody will flourish. So anyway, brothers and sisters, mashallah, we are with the education show. You have been with me, Khalid Patel and Farhan Adam here. Alhamdulillah, I hope you benefited, enjoyed the program. We will be back next week, same time, inshallah. Next week is actually a different tangent to the actual show. It's education, but it's all about how emerging technologies has changed the field of education. The way we teach using education has considerably changed over the years, and we've got next week a network manager and also another computer science and IT teacher coming in, and we'll be talking about the different apps. We've got messages here. I would like to say, as a hijabi senior leader, the representation of BME females in leadership within primary school is low. I have aspirations within SLT, but breaking barriers can be difficult and can be a daunting task when you are not the norm or what society perceived as expected within management. Jazakallah khair for that message there. Something to definitely think about. We can't discuss that. We've only got 5 seconds left. Big assalamu alaikum.